It is a lie." The words were not a shriek, not a plea. They were a statement of fact, delivered into the suffocating silence of the Duke's study with the cold, flat weight of a stone dropped into a well. The sound they made was just as final. Alistair, the 8th Duke of Blackwood, did not move. He stood before the roaring hearth, the firelight catching the severe planes of his face and turning his gray eyes to chips of flint. He held a sheaf of letters in one hand, the paper crinkling with the tension in his grip. They were not her letters. They were forgeries, vile and convincing, detailing an affair with a man she had met only twice in passing. "A lie," Serafina repeated, her voice a thread of sound in the vast, book-lined room. The scent of old leather and beeswax, once a comfort, now felt like the cloying perfume of a funeral parlor. It was the smell of the end. He finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over her. It was not the look of a husband, of a man she had known, however distantly, for 2 years. It was the look of a judge upon a condemned prisoner. There was no heat in it, no fury. There was only a terrible, arctic coldness. It was the cold of betrayal, absolute and unquestioning. "Finch has a witness," he said, his voice as devoid of warmth as his eyes. "A groom who saw you, who saw him leaving your private garden." Finch. Of course. Mr. Finch, his father's steward and now his own. A man whose loyalty to the Blackwood name was said to be etched into his very bones. A man who had looked at her, from the day she arrived as a bride, with an unnerving mixture of deference and possession, as if she were another fine painting to be managed and catalogued. He had always been there, a shadow at Alistair's elbow, his quiet advice a constant, gentle pressure shaping the Duke's world. Now she understood. He had not been shaping it. He had been building a cage around it, around him, and she was the gilded bird to be expelled. She felt a wave of nausea, sharp and acidic, rising from the pit of her stomach. It was not just fear. It was the secret she carried, a flickering candle flame of a life cupped carefully within her, a life he did not yet know about. She had been waiting for the right moment, for a crack in the formidable wall of his duty and distraction, to tell him they were to have a child. The moment had turned to ash. "The witness lies. The letters are forgeries. Alistair, look at me." He looked, but he did not see her. He saw the evidence in his hand. He saw the confirmation of a deep, cynical belief he held about the world, that loyalty was a commodity, and affection a performance. He saw his own failure, his own foolishness, personified in the woman standing before him. "You will be gone by morning," he stated. It was not a request. It was a decree. "I have already sent word to your father. He is disappointed." Disappointed. The word was a masterpiece of cruelty. Her father, a man who had sold her for a title and the security of a connection to the Blackwood dukedom, would not be disappointed. He would be enraged. He would disown her without a second thought to save himself the humiliation. She was utterly, completely alone. She did not cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside her, a glacier of unshed grief. To weep now would be to grant him the satisfaction of her pain. It would be a confession. "Where am I to go?" she asked, the question purely practical. "That is no longer my concern," he replied, turning back to the fire. He tossed the forged letters into the flames. The paper blackened, curled, and then burst into a brief, bright conflagration, illuminating the merciless set of his jaw. He was erasing her. It was that simple. She stood there for another minute, watching his unyielding back. The room was a study in contrasts, the roaring fire and the glacial man, the scent of burning lies and the cold truth of her ruin. This was not a negotiation. It was an execution. Without another word, Serafina turned and walked out of the study, her steps unnaturally steady. The thick carpet drank the sound of her departure. She closed the heavy oak doors behind her, the click of the latch echoing in the cavernous hall like a final, fatal gunshot. The world went silent. The portraits of his ancestors stared down at her with cold, painted eyes. They approved. She was an impurity that had been identified and was now being purged. She did not return to their cavernous, cold bedchamber. That room was a mausoleum of their failed marriage, filled with the ghosts of unspoken words and unmet needs. Instead, she went to her small sitting room, the one place in the sprawling estate that felt remotely hers. She sat in the dark, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The nausea had subsided, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in her mind. He believed Finch. He had not asked for her side, had not looked into her eyes and sought the truth. He had accepted the steward's word, the manufactured proof, and had condemned her on the spot. He had weighed 2 years of marriage against the word of a servant and found her wanting. There was no appeal. There was no hope of reprieve. The decision, when it came, was not born of panic, but of a sudden, fierce instinct for survival. Not for herself, for the child. She would not stay here to be sent away in disgrace, a pariah returned to a family that would lock her away. She would not allow her child to be born into that shame, to be a bastard hidden in a remote country house. She would disappear. She moved with a quiet, desperate purpose. She pulled a small, sturdy valise from the bottom of her wardrobe. She did not pack the silks or the velvets, the gowns that marked her as the Duchess of Blackwood. She packed 2 simple wool dresses, her plainest underthings, and a heavy cloak meant for a lady's maid. She left the jewels in their velvet-lined boxes. They were a part of the cage, and she was leaving the cage behind. Her fingers paused over a simple silver locket, a gift from her mother long ago. It was the only thing she took that held any memory of her old life. From a locked drawer in her writing desk, she retrieved a small purse containing 20 pounds, money saved from her personal allowance over 2 years, hoarded for a reason she had never quite understood until now. It felt like a pittance, a pathetic defense against the world, but it was all she had. She wrote no letter. He had already read the lies meant to destroy her. She would not give him any more of her words to disbelieve. Her last act was to look at herself in the cheval glass. The woman who stared back was a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark in the dim light, filled with a terror so profound it had become a kind of strength. She saw the Duchess of Blackwood, a fragile, decorative thing, and she saw that woman die. In her place, another was being born, someone harder, someone leaner, someone who would survive. She slipped out of the room, a ghost in her own home. The great house was silent, breathing around her in the deep slumber of the night. She crept down a servant's staircase, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every creak of the floorboards was a shout, every shadow a grasping hand. Section dash section. The air in the kitchens was cool and smelled of baked bread and scrubbed stone. She unlatched a side door, the bolt sliding back with a well-oiled whisper. The night air hit her face, cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and freedom. She did not look back. She walked down the long gravel drive, her maid's cloak pulled tight around her, just another shadow dissolving into the pre-dawn gloom. She did not run. She walked with a steady, determined pace towards the distant road, towards an unknown future, leaving the name Seraphina, Duchess of Blackwood, to rot in the house behind her. She was just Sarah now, and Sarah had a child to protect. The first few years were a blur of cold rooms and colder charity. The 20 pounds did not last long. Sarah learned the brutal calculus of poverty, the constant, grinding arithmetic of survival. She learned the ache of hunger, the burn of lye on her hands from scrubbing other people's clothes, the chill that seeped into her bones from a room where the fire was never quite enough. She ended up in Cokeworth, a northern mill town choked with smoke and ambition. The air was thick with the smell of coal and damp wool. The sky a permanent, bruised gray. It was a place where no one asked about your past, because everyone was too busy trying to survive their present. It was the perfect place to disappear. She found a room above a baker's shop, paid for with endless hours of mending torn shirts and darning threadbare socks for the mill workers. Her hands, once soft and pale, became chapped and calloused, the tips pricked and stained. She grew thinner, the delicate lines of her face sharpened by hardship, but her eyes held a new light, not of happiness, but of fierce, unyielding resolve. Leo was born on a raw October night, with only a stern, kind-hearted midwife named Mrs. Gable for help. He was small but perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were the startling, unmistakable gray of the Blackwood family. They were Alistair's eyes. Her love for him was a physical thing, an ache in her chest so powerful it sometimes stole her breath. He was the reason for every hardship, the balm for every wound. He was her whole world, contained within the four walls of their tiny room. She protected him with the ferocity of a she-wolf, keeping them both anonymous, invisible. She told people his father was a sailor, lost at sea. It was a simple lie, a sad story that satisfied the casual curiosity of her neighbors. It was easier than the truth. Meanwhile, at Blackwood Manor, the silence that had descended the night of Seraphina's departure had taken root and festered. Alistair had expected relief, a clean cauterization of the wound she had inflicted. Instead, he found only emptiness. The vast, echoing halls seemed to mock him. Her scent lingered in their rooms for weeks, a ghost of jasmine and lavender that tormented him in his sleep. Finch managed everything with his usual seamless efficiency. He had been proven right. His loyalty was rewarded. The Duke relied on him more than ever, withdrawing further into the shell of his duties, his grief manifesting as a cold, impenetrable anger. He drank more than he should, the fine brandy doing little to dull the persistent, nagging ache in his soul. He had done the right thing. He had excised the rot. So why did he feel as though he were the one who was decaying from the inside out? Section. The first crack in his certainty appeared 3 years later. It was a small thing, a discrepancy in the estate ledgers concerning a large payment made to a former groom around the time of Seraphina's departure. The groom, Finch explained smoothly, had been given a generous severance upon his retirement, due to injury. But Alistair remembered the man. He had been young, hale, and hearty. It was a loose thread. Alistair, for reasons he could not articulate even to himself, began to pull on it. He did not confront Finch. A new, unfamiliar caution had taken hold of him. He traveled to London and hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Mr. Jones, recommended for his tenacity and his ability to blend into the shadows. He gave Jones the groom's name and a simple instruction: find him and learn everything about his retirement. Weeks turned into months. Alistair lived in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of his life, haunted by a face he tried desperately to forget. He would catch himself looking for her in crowded ballrooms, listening for the sound of her laughter in the gardens. The world had become a dull, monochrome landscape without her. Then, one day, Jones returned. The report was laid out on the same desk where Alistair had condemned his wife. The groom had been found living in comfort in a small coastal town. He had not retired. He had been paid to disappear. Under pressure, and with the promise of immunity, he had confessed everything. He had been paid by Finch to lie, to say he had seen the Duchess with a lover. He had never seen a thing. The words struck Alistair with the force of a physical blow. He felt the floor drop away from beneath him, leaving him in a sickening, vertiginous freefall. Finch. The next part of Jones's report was even more damning. The investigator had looked into the estate accounts as requested. He had found years of careful, systematic embezzlement, small amounts at first, then larger, all cleverly disguised, all orchestrated by the man Alistair had trusted above all others. Finch had been robbing him blind for a decade. Serafina, with her quiet intelligence and her growing interest in the household books, must have been getting too close to the truth. She had not been a target of jealousy. She had been a threat to his criminal enterprise. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a horrifying clang. Jones had also spoken to the postmaster in the local village. The man remembered the Duchess, in those first few months after she was sent away, had sent a flurry of letters to the Duke. At least a dozen of them. All had been collected, as was custom, by Mr. Finch to be included with the Duke's daily post. Alistair had never received a single one. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a horror so profound it left him breathless. He had not just been wrong, he had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, prideful fool. He had been a pawn in his steward's grubby little game, and he had sacrificed his wife, the one person who might have truly cared for him, to protect the architect of his ruin. The image of her face in the study that night burned in his mind. The shock in her eyes, the quiet dignity of her denial. It is a lie. She had told him the truth, and he had thrown it back in her face. He had cast her out into the world with nothing, believing her to be the worst kind of traitor, while the real viper was curled at his own hearth. And the letters. She had written to him. She had tried to reach him, to explain, to plead her case, and he, in his monumental arrogance, had been deafened by the silence orchestrated by Finch. What had those letters said? What agony had he left her to endure alone? The emptiness he had been living in for 3 years was suddenly filled with a raging, self-loathing inferno. He had not just lost his wife, he had destroyed her. And for what? For the word of a common thief. His first instinct was to storm out and strangle Finch with his bare hands. But that was the old Alistair, the man who acted on rage and impulse. That man had already caused enough damage. A new, chilling purpose settled over him. He would not just find Finch's guilt, he would find Serafina. He had to. It was not about forgiveness. He knew he did not deserve that. It was about atonement. He had to know if she had survived his monstrous cruelty. "Find her," he said to Jones, his voice raspy with emotion. "Find my wife. Spare no expense. Turn over every stone in this kingdom. Find the Duchess." The search took another 2 years. It was a painstaking, frustrating process. A woman with no title, no friends, and a desperate need to remain hidden was like a needle in a continent of haystacks. Jones's agents followed cold trails and false leads. They found women who matched her description, but were not her. Alistair's hope, which had flared so brightly at first, began to dwindle, replaced by a gnawing fear that he was too late, that the world had swallowed her whole. During this time, he dismantled Finch's life with a cold, methodical precision. He gathered irrefutable proof of the man's crimes. He did not act until he had everything. He wanted not just to dismiss him, but to utterly ruin him, to strip him of everything he had stolen. The confrontation was still to come. First, he had to find Serafina. Then, after 5 years of her absence, a breakthrough. An agent in the north, investigating a list of women who had arrived in the region around the time Serafina had vanished, found a record. A Sarah who fit the physical description, living in the grim town of Cokeworth. She was a seamstress, quiet, kept to herself. And she had a son. A boy of 4, nearly 5, with dark hair and startlingly gray eyes. Alistair received the report on a Tuesday. He was on a train north by Wednesday morning. He traveled not as a duke, but as a simple gentleman, dressed in plain, durable tweed. He left his valet, his carriage, and his title behind. He was not going to Cokeworth to reclaim his Duchess. He was going as a penitent, searching for the woman he had wronged. Cokeworth was worse than he had imagined. The air was a physical weight, thick and gray, and it coated his tongue with the taste of soot. The noise was constant, the clang of machinery, the shouts of workers, the rumble of carts over cobblestones. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and sacred silences of Blackwood. The thought of Serafina, who had been raised in gilded cages, living here, surviving here, made his stomach clench with a fresh wave of guilt. He found her small cottage at the edge of the town, tucked away on a street of identical, grimy brick houses. It was distinguished only by a small, fiercely tidy patch of garden in the front, where a few brave flowers fought for life against the encroaching soot. He saw the boy first. He was playing in the garden, chasing a stray cat with a stick. He was small for his age, but moved with a wiry energy. He laughed, a bright, clear sound in the oppressive air, and then he turned. His gaze met Alistair's across the short distance. The breath left Alistair's body in a painful rush. It was like looking at a portrait of himself as a child. The same dark, unruly hair, the same stubborn set to his chin, and the eyes. They were the Blackwood eyes, a shade of gray so specific and so rare that there could be no doubt. This was his son, a child born in exile, raised in poverty, because of his father's blind, unforgivable pride. At that moment, the cottage door opened, and she stepped out. Time seemed to stop. It was Serafina, but it was not. The soft, gentle woman he remembered was gone. This woman was honed, pared down to the essential. She was thinner, the bones of her face more prominent. Her hands, as she wiped them on her apron, were red and capable. Her simple wool dress was clean, but faded from countless washings. But it was her eyes that held him captive. The sorrow he remembered was still there, but it was banked now, overlaid with a layer of hardened steel. She was no longer a duchess. She was a survivor. "Leo!" she called, her voice clear and carrying a note of authority he had never heard before. "Come inside. It is getting chilly." The boy, Leo, ran to her, and she scooped him up, her movements filled with a fierce, protective love that was painful to watch. She had done this alone. She had protected their son, raised him, loved him, all while he had been rattling around his empty mansion, drowning in self-pity. She saw him then. Her body went rigid. The warmth in her face vanished, replaced by a mask of ice. Recognition dawned, followed swiftly by a deep, visceral shock, and then something else. Not fear, contempt. She set the child down gently behind her, creating a physical barrier with her own body. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion except a weary, ingrained hostility. She did not call him Alistair. She did not call him Your Grace. He was an unwelcome intrusion, a specter from a past she had tried to bury. "Serafina," he managed to say, his own voice sounding foreign and strained. The name felt like a violation on his lips. She was not that person anymore. "My name is Sarah," she corrected him coldly. "You have no business here. Leave." "I can't," he said, taking a hesitant step forward. "I know everything. About Finch, the letters, the groom. I know it was all a lie." He had expected this to be a thunderclap, a revelation that would shatter the wall between them. He had imagined this moment for years, rehearsed the words in his head. He would lay the truth at her feet, and it would be the first step towards... What? He did not even know. Her reaction was not what he had anticipated. She did not gasp. Her expression did not soften. A bitter, mirthless smile touched her lips. "You know," she repeated, the words dripping with 5 years of accumulated acid. "How wonderful for you. Your steward held the knife, but you were the one who twisted it. Did you come here expecting gratitude for finally discovering a truth I told you to your face 5 years ago?" Her words were a physical blow, striking him with more force than any fist. She was right. Of course she was right. His discovery changed nothing of his own culpability. He had been the judge, jury, and executioner. Finch had merely provided the perjured testimony. "No," he said, his voice low. I expect nothing. I had to see you. I had to know if you were safe. Safe? She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. I have scrubbed floors until my fingers bled to keep a roof over our heads. I have gone hungry so my son could eat. I have lived in fear every single day that my past would find me. Do not dare to speak to me of safety. She pulled the boy closer to her hand resting on his dark hair. You have seen me. I am alive. Now go. She turned to lead Leo back inside, to close the door on him forever. He is my son, Alistair said, the words torn from him, raw and desperate. She froze, her back to him. For a long moment she did not move. When she finally turned, the look on her face was terrifying. The cold contempt was gone, replaced by a blazing, protective fury that made him flinch. He is my son, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. He has my name. He has my love. He has my protection. He has never known a father. He has never needed one. You gave up any right to him on the night you threw his mother out into the dark without a backward glance. He is mine. You will not touch him. You will not speak to him. You will not come near him. Seraphina, please. Leave Cokeworth, she commanded, her eyes burning into his. If you ever cared for me at all, even for a moment, you will get back on your train, and you will go back to your cold, empty life, and you will leave us in peace. That is the only kindness you have left to give. She took Leo's hand and pulled him inside the cottage. The door shut with a definitive, resounding click. The latch slid home. Alistair stood alone on the grimy street, the soot-filled air choking him. He was shivering, though the day was not cold. He had found her, and he had lost her all over again. He had seen the truth in her eyes. He was not a savior who had come to rescue her. He was the monster from her past, come to destroy the fragile peace she had built in the ruins he had made of her life. He did not leave. He could not. To leave now would be to confirm her vision of him as a coward, a man who fled from the consequences of his actions. It would be a second abandonment. He walked to the only inn in Cokeworth, a noisy, grimy establishment called the Miner's Rest, and took a room. The sheets were damp, and the air smelled of stale beer and boiled cabbage, but it did not matter. Discomfort was a part of his penance. He sent a message to Jones in London, instructing him to bring the former groom, the postmaster, and all the documented evidence of Finch's crimes to Cokeworth. He would not ask her to believe him. He would prove it to her, lay the facts out like stones in a foundation. For the next week, he existed in a strange limbo. He kept his distance from her cottage, respecting the boundaries she had drawn, but he watched. From the window of his room, which overlooked her street, he saw the rhythm of her life. He saw her walk Leo to the small dame school in the mornings. He saw her carry heavy baskets of laundry to and from the large houses on the other side of town. He saw her haggling for vegetables in the market, her face set in a determined, focused mask. He saw how hard her life was. Every movement was efficient. Every penny counted. There was no room for error, no space for leisure. And through it all, she cared for Leo with a tenderness that was fierce and absolute. He saw them in her small garden in the evenings, her head bent close to his as she taught him to read from a tattered book. He saw the way the boy looked at her, with complete, unadulterated adoration. She was his entire world. Alistair felt a jealousy so profound it was a physical sickness. He had missed it all, his son's first steps, his first words, the shape of his laughter. He had forfeited all of it because of his own blind pride. He began to do small things, acts of service that required no interaction. He learned from the innkeeper that Mrs. Gable, the midwife who was Seraphina's only friend, had a husband with a bad lung. Alistair used his name for the first time, sending a telegram to a renowned London physician and arranging, at great expense, for him to travel to Cokeworth for a consultation. He paid for it all anonymously through a local solicitor. He saw a need for clean water in her part of town and commissioned a new well to be dug, telling the town council it was an anonymous donation from a guilt-ridden industrialist. He chopped a mountain of firewood late one night and left it stacked neatly by Serafina's back door, retreating before the sun rose. She knew it was him. He could see it in the suspicious, guarded way she looked down the street. She used the wood and Mrs. Gable's husband saw the doctor, but she never acknowledged him. Her silence was a wall of granite. He deserved it. He kept on, not expecting thanks, but simply because doing something, anything to ease the burden he had placed on her, was the only thing that made sense. Jones arrived a week later with his small retinue of witnesses. Alistair did not take them to her cottage. Instead, he sent a note via Mrs. Gable. It was simple. I have proof. I have the men Finch paid. I will present it all at the inn at 6 o'clock this evening. Whether you choose to come is your decision. I will not bother you again after tonight if that is your wish. A. He did not know if she would come. He spent the afternoon pacing the floor of the inn's private parlor, his nerves stretched taut. The groom, a nervous, sweating man named Thomas, sat huddled in a corner, terrified of the Duke, but more terrified of the consequences of his perjury. The old postmaster, a kindly man named Mr. Hemlock, simply looked sad. At 6 o'clock, the door opened. Serafina stood there. She was wearing her best dress, a simple gray wool, and her hair was pinned up neatly. She looked pale but composed. Her eyes swept over the men in the room, her expression unreadable. "Say what you have to say," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She did not sit down. Alistair nodded to Jones, who began. Methodically, dispassionately, the investigator laid out the entire conspiracy. He presented the bank drafts showing the payments from Finch to Thomas. He had Thomas himself recount, in a stammering, guilt-ridden voice, how the steward had approached him, coached him on what to say, and paid him for his silence. Then Mr. Hemlock spoke. He described the letters Serafina had sent, week after week. "Desperate, they seemed, Your Grace. Begging your pardon, ma'am," he amended, nodding to Serafina. "The steward, Mr. Finch, he always took them. Said he'd see the Duke got them personally. I thought nothing of it. He was the Duke's man, after all." Finally, Jones produced the ledgers, showing the years of Finch's embezzlement, the clear financial motive for getting rid of a duchess who was too astute for her own good. Throughout it all, Serafina did not move. Her face was a still, white mask, but Alistair saw the subtle tremor in her hands, which she had clasped tightly in front of her. She was not hearing a story of his innocence. She was hearing a detailed account of how she had been systematically, cruelly destroyed. When it was over, a heavy silence filled the room. "Thank you, gentlemen," Alistair said, his voice hoarse. "You may go." Jones ushered the two men out, leaving Alistair and Serafina alone. "Do you believe it?" he asked softly. She finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw not anger, but a profound, bone-deep weariness. The steel in her eyes had dissolved, revealing the raw wound beneath. "I believe," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "that I was right. It was a lie." She took a shaky breath. "And it does not change the fact that you did not believe me. It does not change the last 5 years." "I know," he said. "God, I know. I cannot change the past, Serafina. I can only try to atone for it." He took a step closer, his hands clenched at his sides to stop himself from reaching for her. "I returned to Blackwood. I confronted Finch. I had him arrested in front of the entire staff. I told them all the truth, that he was a thief and a liar, and that he had driven away the finest duchess the estate had ever known through his deceit. Your name is cleared." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Vindication. But it was fleeting. "My name," she said with a hint of her old bitterness, "is Sarah. I have no need of the name Blackwood." But Leo does, he countered gently. He is the heir. He deserves his birthright. A life of security. A future. Not this. He gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the smoky, impoverished town. He has a life here, she insisted, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. He has me. He is happy. Is he? Alistair pressed, his heart aching. Or does he simply not know what he is missing? A father? A home? A legacy? He saw the conflict warring in her face. Her fierce, protective love for her son was battling with the deep, justified distrust she felt for him. I will not be your Duchess again, she said, her voice hardening. I will not return to that cage. I am not asking you to, he said earnestly. The cage is gone. I broke it, and the man who lived in it with you is gone too. I am trying to be someone different, someone better. Come back with me, not as my Duchess, as my partner. Help me run the estate. Your insights, your strength. Blackwood needs you. I need you. It was the closest he had ever come to admitting his own weakness, his own need. She stared at him, her gray eyes searching his, looking for the man he claimed to be. He held her gaze, letting her see all of it, the shame, the regret, the desperate yearning hope. I need time, she said finally, her voice strained. I cannot make this decision now. Take all the time you need, he said, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. She had not said no. I am not leaving Cokeworth. I will be here. He had one last thing. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small, worn, folded piece of paper. It was the only one of her letters that had been found, tucked away in a drawer in Finch's desk, perhaps kept as a trophy. It was dated just a month after she had left. Finch missed one, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I think it belongs to you. He did not give it to her directly. He felt he had not earned the right to place anything in her hand. Instead, he laid it on the table between them. Then he turned and left the room, leaving her alone with the ghost of her own past, praying that it would not be the thing that drove her away from him for good. Seraphina stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the letter. Her letter. She remembered writing it, huddled in a freezing boarding house room, her belly aching with hunger and fear, her heart screaming with a grief so immense she thought it would tear her in two. It was a letter full of desperate pleading, of frantic avowals of her innocence, begging him to listen, to believe her, to find her. She could not bring herself to pick it up. It represented a version of herself she no longer recognized, a weak, broken thing, begging for mercy from a man who had none to give. To read it now would be to feel that agony all over again. She left it on the table and walked out of the inn, her mind a maelstrom of confusion and pain. The truth had not set her free. It had simply illuminated the bars of her prison more clearly. For 5 years, her anger at Alistair had been a shield, a fire that kept her warm and gave her strength. Now that shield was gone, and she felt vulnerable, exposed. He was not just the villain of her story anymore. He was a victim too, albeit a willing one. And he was trying, with a humility she never would have thought him capable of, to make amends. The next few days were a quiet torment. Alistair kept his word. He remained in town but kept his distance. She would see him sometimes, sitting on a bench in the town square, watching Leo play with the other children. He never approached. He just watched, his face a mask of profound longing and regret. Leo, of course, had noticed the stranger. "Who is that man, Mama?" he asked one afternoon, pointing a grubby finger towards the inn. "The sad man. He is always looking at us." Seraphina's heart seized. "He is someone I used to know a long time ago," she said, the words feeling inadequate and false. "Why is he sad?" Leo persisted, with the relentless curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Because he made a great mistake. she said softly, more to herself than to him. And he cannot fix it. Her friend, Mrs. Gable, was more direct. The man is eating his heart out for you, Sarah, she said one evening as they sat by the fire. My Thomas is breathing easier than he has in years because of that doctor. The whole street is drinking clean water. A bad man doesn't do such things. A rich man does, Serafina countered weakly. It is easy to be generous with money. It is not the money, Mrs. Gable insisted, her knitting needles clicking in the silence. It is the watching. He watches you and the boy like you are the sun, and he has been living in darkness. A woman would have to be blind not to see it. Serafina was not blind. She saw it, and it terrified her. It was easier to fight a monster than to forgive a man. Forgiveness required trust, and trust was a country she had been exiled from for a very long time. The stalemate was broken by her son. A few days later, Alistair was not in his usual spot. Serafina felt a pang of, what? Disappointment, relief. She did not know. She took Leo to the market. As she was paying for a loaf of bread, she realized the boy was no longer by her side. Panic flared in her chest, hot and immediate. She spun around, calling his name. She saw him across the square, a small, determined figure, marching directly towards the entrance of the Miners' Rest. Her blood ran cold. She dropped her basket and ran after him. "Leo, stop!" But he was already pushing open the heavy tavern door and disappearing inside. She followed him into the dim, noisy taproom. Leo was standing in the middle of the room, looking around. He saw Alistair sitting alone at a table in the corner, a glass of untouched ale in front of him. Leo walked straight up to him. Alistair looked up, his face a study in stunned surprise. "Are you the sad man?" Leo asked, his voice piping and clear, cutting through the low grumble of the tavern. Alistair stared at the boy, his son, who was looking at him with those impossibly familiar gray eyes. He could not speak. He could only nod, his throat tight with a knot of unspeakable emotion. "My mama says you made a mistake," Leo announced to the silent watching room. "Did you make her cry?" The simple, brutal question hung in the air. Alistair felt the gazes of every man in the room on him. He looked past Leo and saw Serafina standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with alarm. He looked back down at the boy. This was the moment of truth. He could lie, he could deflect, but he was done with lies. "Yes," he said, his voice husky. "I did. I made her cry very much. It was the worst mistake of my life." Leo considered this with the solemn gravity of childhood. He then reached into the pocket of his small coat. He pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. The letter. He must have taken it from the parlor when she was not looking. "You left this," Leo said, holding it out. "It belongs to my mama. Maybe it will help you fix it." He placed the letter on the table in front of Alistair. Then, with a satisfied nod, he turned and ran back to his mother, grabbing her hand. Alistair stared at the letter. His own damnation, written in her hand, delivered back to him by the son he had never known. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. He looked up at Serafina. The whole tavern was watching them now, caught up in the small, intense drama. He picked up the letter. He stood up and walked towards her, his legs feeling unsteady. He stopped a few feet away, holding it out to her. "He is right," Alistair said, his voice low and meant only for her. "This is yours, and he is right about everything else, too." She looked at his outstretched hand, at the letter, then up at his face. She saw no pride there, no ducal arrogance. She saw only a man stripped bare, his soul flayed open for her to see. She saw the truth of his regret, the depth of his shame, and in that moment, something inside her, a knot of anger and grief she had carried for 5 years, finally began to loosen. Slowly, she reached out and took the letter from his hand. Their fingers brushed. It was the first time they had touched in 5 years. A jolt, like lightning, passed between them. It was not a spark of passion, but of recognition. A ghost of the connection they once had, or could have had. She did not speak. She simply took Leo's hand, turned, and led him out of the inn, leaving Alistair standing alone in the sudden silence. That night, she read the letter. Her own words, her own desperate voice, cried out to her from the page. She wept. She wept for the girl who had written it, for the wife who had been so brutally betrayed, for the mother who had been forced to fight for her child's survival alone. She wept until there were no tears left, and when the weeping was done, there was a strange, quiet calm. The past was a scar, a terrible, disfiguring thing. It would always be a part of her. But it was not the whole of her. She had survived it. She had built a life from its ashes. The next morning, she packed a small bag. She dressed Leo in his best clothes. Then she walked with him to the inn. Alistair was sitting in the parlor, staring out the window. He looked as if he had not slept. He stood when she entered. "We will go with you," she said, without preamble. Hope, fierce and fragile, flared in his eyes. "Serafina—" "On my terms," she cut in, her voice steady and strong. "I am not returning as your wife, not yet. Perhaps not ever. I am returning as Leo's mother. I will have my own rooms. I will have a say in the running of the estate. I will be your partner, as you offered, but nothing more until I can be sure that the man who sent me away is truly gone." She was not asking. She was dictating. She was a queen negotiating the terms of a treaty, and he had never loved her more. "Anything," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Whatever you ask, it is yours." The return to Blackwood was a strange, surreal experience. The great house was the same, but she was different. She walked through its grand halls not as an intimidated bride or a broken outcast, but as a woman who knew her own worth. The staff, who had all been told the truth of her exile, greeted her with a profound, deferential respect they had never shown before. She took a suite of rooms in the East Wing, far from the ducal chambers. She set up a life for herself and Leo within the vast estate, a life that was hers. Alistair respected her boundaries completely. He never pushed, never presumed. He ate his meals alone, unless she invited him to join her and Leo, which she began to do, tentatively at first, and then more frequently. She threw herself into the work of the estate. Her experiences in Cokeworth had given her a perspective Alistair had never had. She saw the hardships of the tenants, the struggles of the local villagers. She established a school for the estate children. She used the ducal funds to improve the cottages, to ensure fair wages. She was not just a duchess. She was a force of nature, remaking Blackwood from the inside out. Alistair watched her, his heart filled with a mixture of awe and love so painful it was almost unbearable. He worked alongside her, deferring to her judgment, learning from her. He was courting her, he realized, not with flowers and jewels, but with spreadsheets and crop reports, with shared concerns and quiet, late-night conversations over estate plans. He was also courting his son. He spent hours with Leo, teaching him to ride, to fish, to understand the land that would one day be his. He did not try to replace Serafina in the boy's affections, but to supplement her. He was a quiet, steady, loving presence. He was simply there. The healing was slow. It was not a single moment of forgiveness, but 1,000 small moments of trust, rebuilt painstakingly, day by day. It was in a shared laugh over one of Leo's jokes. It was in a moment of comfortable silence as they watched the sunset over the rolling hills. It was in the way she began to call him Alistair again, her voice soft instead of sharp. One evening, a year after their return, he found her in the library, the room where he had shattered their world. She was standing by the fire, just as he had been that night. "I used to hate this room," she said quietly, not turning as he approached. "I saw it as the place where my life ended. It was the place where my blindness was absolute," he replied, his voice filled with the memory of his shame. She finally turned to face him. The firelight softened the lines of her face, and her gray eyes were clear and calm. "Perhaps," she said softly, "it can be the place where we begin again." He searched her face, hardly daring to breathe. He saw no hesitation there, no lingering anger. He saw a choice, a deliberate, conscious decision to step out of the past and into a new future. He closed the distance between them and gently took her hands. They were no longer the chapped, raw hands of a laundress, but they were not the impossibly soft hands of the Duchess he had married. They were the hands of a strong, capable woman, his partner, his equal. "Serafina," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I love you. I think I have loved you all along, but I was too much of a fool to know what love was." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it was not a tear of sorrow. "I know," she said, her voice catching. I think I am ready to love you too, the man you are now." He did not kiss her then. The moment felt too sacred for that. He simply raised her hands to his lips and held them there, a silent vow of devotion, of gratitude, of a love that had been lost in the fire and forged anew in the crucible of atonement. The story of the Duke and his lost and found Duchess became a quiet legend in the halls of Blackwood. Theirs was not a fairy tale romance. It was something stronger, more real. It was a partnership built on the hard-won ground of respect, cemented by the shared love for their son, and nourished by a forgiveness that had been earned, not given. Years later, they would often be found not in the grand ballroom or the formal dining room, but in the sprawling gardens behind the manor. One crisp autumn afternoon, Serafina watched as Alistair chased a laughing, 10-year-old Leo through a pile of fallen leaves. The air was clean, filled with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. The silence was not empty, but full of life, of laughter, of a deep and abiding peace. Alistair caught her eye over their son's head, and he smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached the depths of his gray eyes, erasing the last shadows of the sad man from the inn. She smiled back, her heart full. The cage was a distant memory. Here, in the open air, with the two people who were her entire world, she was finally, truly free.